Hello and welcome to the channel, and I'm here for a ranking video for you guys. Now for this ranking, I'm going to rank the subgenres of metal. Now keep in mind, I'm going to just stick with the main subgenres of metal, like not the more, I guess, obscure ones, the ones that are not so well known, of course, like depressive black metal and all that stuff, and I guess the subgenres that are of the underground, I guess, like not the ones that are not so well known. I'm just going to stick with the main subgenres of metal, or at least I would consider these the main subgenres of metal. There's about 15 subgenres here, and we're going to go from worst to best. Now, I know there will be a lot of people that will disagree with my ranking, especially in the metal community. I know that this video will probably not go well with a lot of people, especially where I have new metal and black metal, for example. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So first up, now the genre of metal that I would say is maybe my least favorite subgenre of metal ever would have to be folk metal. In other words, Viking metal. Now the thing is with folk metal is it has this medieval sound to it, which I just personally am not a fan of at all. I mean, that whole Viking sound, medieval sound that's incorporated with metal, I always found that to be kind of cheesy, to be honest. There was a time where I thought it had its moments, you know, it had its place in metal, but I just personally don't see it, to be honest. Personally not a fan of it at all. I think it's really cheesy, and I just don't see how this sound is enjoyable in today's time, I guess, in today's timeline. But, I mean, can't say that it's horrible or anything, but I'm just personally not into it. So next we got deathcore. Now, either this subgenre or folk metal would have to be my least favorite, but my issue with deathcore is, well, I have a few problems with it actually. I'm not really into a lot of extreme stuff, and deathcore is a more extreme subgenre of metal, and I mean, if you know me well enough, extreme styles of metal has never really been my thing. I mean, I do like a few bands in that style, but I can't say that I'm really into anything in deathcore. Not only do I find it a little too extreme, but I also find it kind of edgy at the same time. So that's where deathcore is going in the ranking. So next we got glam metal. Now, I don't think that all glam metal is bad, or, you know, it's the worst subgenre, obviously, you know. Some people might give me some heat for putting glam metal above deathcore and maybe even folk metal, but I do like some bands that are kind of glammy though, such as Def Leppard. I think they're a very good band, so yeah, I think glam metal is, I mean, I do think it's kind of overhated, but at the same time, I'm not really into glam metal as a whole, so yeah. That's where glam metal is going in the ranking regardless. So next we got power metal. Now, this is probably another placement of my ranking that a lot of people might not agree with, because I know that maybe some people do really like power metal, but for me, it's never really been my cup of tea. Power metal, it's not all bad. I mean, my main issue with it is kind of like a similar issue with folk metal is, you know, I don't want to say it has like particularly that medieval sound to it, but it also has this fantasy vibe to it, which I'm just not really a fan of. That's just me, though. Now, I do think that Theocracy is a pretty good band in power metal. Now, I don't listen to them a lot or anything. I'm only really into a handful of their songs, but I do think that Theocracy is, they're an alright band in power metal, so. But all in all, I can't say that I hate everything, but yeah. Power metal, it's alright. Maybe it's a subgenre I'll look into more, but for now, it's this low in the ranking. So next, we got black metal. Now, some people might definitely disagree with this genre being this low in the ranking, because I know that some people would have black metal at number 1 or at least in the top 3. But for me, like with deathcore, I'm just not really into a lot of more extreme stuff. Now, I wouldn't say that black metal is necessarily as edgy as deathcore, but I just think that black metal, like, at least from what I can tell, it sounds a little more, I guess, mature than deathcore anyway. And I can't say that I dislike everything in black metal. Like, there's some black metal bands that I actually don't find too bad, such as Immortal and Alcest, if I got the band name right. I believe they're black metal, at least that's something that I've heard, but yeah, so I can't say that I dislike everything in black metal, so yeah. I mean, it's not all bad, so it's got to go here in the ranking though, so black metal. Alright, so next we got doom metal. Now, the reason that doom metal is not in the top 5 or anything is mainly just because I'm not really into many bands in doom metal, but everything that I've heard from doom metal I do like Candlemass. I think Candlemass is a pretty good band, even though I'm not really fully into them yet. Maybe that's a band I'll look into more. But I do know that they're doom metal, and of course Black Sabbath's earlier work as well. That's something I wanted to point out is that stuff is kind of doom metal as well. Or some people have even argued that it is doom metal, but yeah, regardless, doom metal's not all bad. Alright, so next we got groove metal. Now, with groove metal, there's not really a lot of bands that I'm into in groove metal, maybe besides Pantera. At least that's what I've heard. I've heard Pantera is groove metal. And there's also some other bands that I like that do incorporate groove metal, I guess, influences and sounds, such as Demon Hunter. Now, Demon Hunter's not a groove metal band, at least I wouldn't consider them groove metal, but they do have some groove metal influences for sure, so yeah. But groove metal, can't say it's all bad, but it is kind of hit or miss at times, so that's where it's going in the ranking. Next, we got industrial metal. Kind of the same thing with groove metal. Not really into a lot of industrial metal, but I do like a few things here and there, and I also do like some bands that do incorporate industrial influences. I would say that, as of now, my favorite industrial metal band is Fear Factory. So, yeah, but industrial metal, not really much to say about it. I think it's kind of unique, though, and I think it has its place in metal, but yeah, not my favorite subgenre of metal, but definitely not bad. Next, we got melodic death metal. Now, this is a subgenre of metal that I actually got into earlier in my journey with metal as a whole, particularly with bands like Soilwork, In Flames, Dark Tranquillity, and maybe a few others, mainly those 3 bands, but yeah, those were some of my first melodic death metal bands, and I would probably say that In Flames is my favorite in that genre, even though they don't make that style of music anymore. But yeah, I think it's overall a pretty good subgenre. Now, I do think that melodeath is kind of irrelevant to an extent. Like, I could personally care less if I ever get into another melodeath band again. I do know some people that are still passionate about this subgenre. There's still some people that I know that really do still listen to this genre a lot, and I used to be that way a few years ago, but I just prefer other genres of metal personally. But I do think it's a good subgenre overall, even though I don't feel like the relevance is all there. But In Flames is a very solid band for sure. So next we got traditional death metal. Now, this is one that might be surprising for some people that it's above melodeath itself, but that's mainly because of 2 bands, the bands Death and Obituary, which I do think are very good bands, and of course my 2 favorites in the death metal genre. Now, the genre as a whole is not something that I'm particularly into a lot. There's really only a few bands that I'm really into, of course, so yeah. But death metal, it can also be kind of hit or miss for me, but you know the bands that I'm into within this genre I really do like, so yeah, that's where death metal has to go in the ranking. And I know it's a pretty popular genre for metal as well, so I know some people might have it at number 1, but just for me, not so much. So with that being said, next we got nu metal. Now, I know some of you probably want to throw tomatoes at your screen right now because I have nu metal above death metal and melodeath and black metal and all that, but I personally think that nu metal is maybe the most overhated genre of metal out there. There are some very solid bands, of course, like Deftones and Linkin Park, particularly those bands. Seven Dust as well, kind of an underrated band. I know Slipknot is a very popular band in nu metal, and Korn, and many other bands. But yeah, nu metal, I think it's overall a good subgenre of metal, even though it might not be my number one, but it is in the top 5, which I know some people might laugh at that, but I don't care. I think there's some pretty solid stuff to be found in nu metal, especially Deftones and Linkin Park, which are my favorite nu metal bands. All right, so next we got metalcore. Again, some people might, not like the fact that I have metalcore above some of the genres that I talked about previously, but metalcore, it's kind of an overhated genre as well. But at the same time, I can understand the heat for it, especially when it comes to modern metalcore, particularly bands of the late 2000s and the 2010s and bands of now. Those particular bands in metalcore are just extremely edgy for me. Now, if metalcore was just that, like if it was just bands of the late 2000s and the 2010s, then yeah, metalcore would probably be at the bottom for me. It would probably sit at the bottom at this ranking. But if it wasn't for bands of the early 2000s like Killswitch Engage, As I Lay Dying, Demon Hunter, Trivium, and many others, metalcore's got to go here. If it wasn't for the bands that I just mentioned in early 2000s metalcore would probably be a lot lower. So yeah, but metalcore, that's what's going at number 4. And also metalcore was my first subgenre of metal. That was like my introduction to the metal world. So yeah, so here we are at the top 3. At number 3, I'm going to go with heavy metal, which is basically just traditional heavy metal. What I mean by this is bands like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Black Sabbath, and bands of that variety. And I pretty much got no complaint with that stuff. I mean, it is, of course, one of the first genres of metal, of course. Of course, it's just called heavy metal. And I mean, if you're a metalhead, how is this genre not in the top 5, honestly? Especially considering that this was metal's start after all. So yeah, so Iron Maiden, definitely a great band and probably one of my favorite bands too, and they're probably my favorite in that particular style. So yeah, definitely great stuff. So at number 2, we got thrash metal. Now, if you were to ask me to do this ranking maybe a couple of years ago, I probably would have thrash metal a little bit lower. Not much lower, but I'm thinking like number 4 or something. But thrash metal has really grown on me a lot, so that's why it's at number 2 for me. There's a lot of bands that I really like in this subgenre. Metallica. Metallica was actually my first classic heavy metal band and my first thrash metal band and all that. Yeah, definitely one of my favorites in thrash. I don't care what anyone says about that. I know that they're mainstream and all that, but who cares? Megadeth is another favorite. Anthrax, Death Angel, Overkill, particularly those bands. And you got other great bands as well, like Testament. And when it comes to modern thrash metal, not really into a lot of modern thrash, but I do think Vector is a good band, though. That is a band that I did want to point out. So I think thrash metal actually has a lot to offer, and I think you can make the argument that it's an overhated genre of metal. I know that some people say that, oh, it's too samey for me, but at the same time, the people that say that are people that listen to modern metalcore, which to me all sounds the same, I personally can't tell the difference between Asking Alexandria and Bring Me the Horizon, okay? Like, if you were to play one of their songs, it could be either or for me. But that's just how I feel. I mean, I get that thrash metal was kind of hit or miss for some people, but I do think that overall, it is one of the best subgenres of metal. So that only leaves us with number 1, which, if you know me well enough, you probably already know what number 1 is. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that it was going to make number 1. And at number 1, I gotta go with progressive metal. This is easily my favorite subgenre of metal, and Dream Theater is probably my favorite progressive metal band, and they're one of my favorite bands just in general. Probably a top 3 favorite band for me these days. I mean, I listen to them a lot. I mean, a lot. It's probably one of my most listened to bands nowadays. But there's other really great progressive metal bands, of course, like Queensryche, Fate's Warning, Soen, Tool. There's even Symphony X, which I do think is a very good band. That's a band that I would like to look into more. Now, when it comes to prog metal, I am mostly into older prog. Now, of course, I did mention Soen, which Soen is probably the only modern progressive metal band that I like. Now, there are other bands that I think are, you know, pretty good as well, like Leprous. Now, Leprous, I don't listen to them a lot or anything, but I don't think that they're bad, though, by any means. You know, I think they're a good band overall, even though I'm not a big fan of them. But yeah, progressive metal, I just think that it has a lot to offer, and it's pretty diverse as well. And the diversity thing is definitely one of the reasons why progressive metal is one of my favorites of metal, and probably my favorite of metal. And just the overall complexity and just the overall sound that it has to offer, it's just excellent. And the musicianship is just fantastic. So progressive metal, it's got to be my favorite. It's got to be my #1 favorite subgenre of metal. So there you go, guys. That is my ranking of the metal subgenres. Let me know what you guys think. How would you rank the metal genres? Or if you just want to rank a top 5 or whatever, that's cool too. Feel free to let me know what you think of this ranking. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day and take care.